Welcome once again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight on your brain. White lightning that the man is afraid of. We've hit the big time.
We have hit the big show because we had a video removed. It had about 11 people watch it first with 3 likes. So go us. That's a pretty good ratio. Before it got pulled, but we talked about a certain pharmaceutical, we'll call it, in this episode, and I appealed that because we did stay within the parameters of what I brought up here, which is the YouTube guidelines on talking about this certain pharmaceutical. So what you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to have content alleging that these cause chronic side effects outside of rare side effects that are recognized by health authorities. We talked about a side effect that is recognized as the number one side effect, the number one rare side effect. We'll have to use that word, I guess, from now on. The number one rare, and it is rare. The numbers we brought up, were, parts per million.
Again, from the CDC.
Yeah. Okay. So to address they are recognizing this side effect, so we did not break that, and we did use their numbers, so we did not make it seem any less rare than the authorities themselves also pose. Efficacy, we did not even touch efficacy of this certain pharmaceutical in that episode, and we talked about transmission of the disease in different variants, not of that pharmaceutical. All right. And then ingredients, we didn't even talk about ingredients. So we did not break any of those guidelines, and we are not talking about any of those things outside of these parameters today. We are not giving medical advice. We are not recommending one thing or another. Anything we talk about is just pure numbers. And if you make a decision based on those numbers, then that's your decision. That's not us.
Yes. And we really rather, it was just a small segment at the beginning where we talked about the numbers. One, because you were using their own numbers, and then the regressive left's own logic with CRT to show how mandates are racist. But that's really what we spent our time talking about, was mandates. So no, we aren't giving public health advice. We really were talking about public policy. And if public policy is not open for discussion, then we don't live in a democracy.
Well, I just wanted to say that we didn't violate any of the rules, so I did appeal it. And again, like you said, we don't live in a democracy. But YouTube is a private company. So until rules are changed for social media, then we have to follow them. I am backing everything up on Rumble now, which is taking a long time. So
yeah. I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but did you know John Stossel is suing Facebook?
Yes. And the defense of Facebook is fact checks our opinion. Yes.
So
it's the Rachel Maddow defense. That's
this boggles my mind, and the only thing I can think is that nobody wants to do it because it would be way too expensive. But I don't know why we have not seen the largest class action lawsuit in history against social media companies, because now I would imagine this is because it would just be a waste of money for any ambulance chasing lawyer who would want to do this, even though it would be a huge payday if you won. Because every time I was listening to an interview with Stossel's lawyer, is that every time a case has actually gone before a judge, the social media lawyers just say Section 230, we're protected, and it's gone, it's thrown out. Well, but that should be an argument of defense that they actually have to make, because by their own actions, they shouldn't fall under Section 230. So the right is really ticked off. A lot of the right is really ticked off at some of the big talkers. Like I have, you know, my lefty friends, one in particular who I lovingly call my commie friend, likes to try and rile me up by making fun of Ted Cruz, and I just shrug and go, yeah. Because one of the really frustrating things about Ted Cruz is he talked a big game
Mhm.
about big tech censorship, but then the 4 years they held all the both houses and the presidency, they didn't do anything about it. And my thinking is, why do you have to do something about it? Why do you have to change the Section 230 rules when, by their own actions and even by their own admission, they aren't a platform, they are a publisher?
Mhm.
But that's just further admission by Facebook that they're a publisher, because they're offering opinion, they're editorializing people's content. How can you possibly say you're a platform then? You're not. You're a publisher.
Mhm. My big worry is the echo chamber, because when you're okay, let me think of the right way to say this, because now you've also got these articles about right-wing platforms are growing. Well, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because now I'm uploading everything to Rumble because that's our only option to get some of those videos out. I mean, that was the farthest thing from what you would call a right-wing video, because we didn't actually even give any political commentary in at least that first half of that. We talked about the rates in young kids, and this is information we should be sharing. So, but we have to go to one of these alternate platforms that's getting this stigma just to get that information out. Whereas if we were allowed to freely speak on YouTube, then you would have all these different opinions. How much are you not seeing? Because I mean, they're taking it down.
You know, something really disturbing to me that I just thought of when you were showing those guidelines is, you know, it occurred to me that maybe what they're going to hang their hat on is chronic side effects. Wait a second. Sometimes side effects are chronic. There are certain conditions, just throw out the side effect, throw out the particular of what we're talking about. There are certain conditions that if you develop them, they're chronic. A heart condition never goes away. Am I right?
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are things that can happen to you and it never goes away. I was injured on a work site. It never went away. It caused damage that just didn't heal, isn't fixable. It never goes away.
Well, being overweight for a time and then losing the weight, that you still have downstream effects from having that obesity young. So that's it. We can't think of our body as this thing that renews every day. I mean, it does to some degree. We are remodeling all the time, but it's going to have downstream effects of anything you do. That's why it's so important to make good decisions and not just YOLO it for a little bit. And
well, for crying out loud, we shared the article that Gupta was talking about, or that we're mostly sure Gupta was talking about with Rogan, about chronic effects from the unknown disease of questionable origin. There are documented cases, rare, as we're supposed to say with other things, but there are documented cases of lasting heart problems from the disease. These things happen, and they're effing serious.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of get that in the air. Part of it is a disclaimer. Part of it is because people that watching this, a lot other than 11 people won't even know there was a video before.
Yeah.
Because it just disappeared itself. It's unless it pops back up. We'll follow up on that. But I hope they at least give a response why.
That would be nice.
Because theoretically, all the appeals go to a human, not the algorithm. So
the infuriating thing though is, all right, I would repost an edited version of that with a description to let everyone know we had to edit this because the powers that be got offended by it. But one of the infuriating things that I know from having listened to people who have had videos taken down is they don't bother to give you any context, because these people have said, well, okay, give me the specific example. Tell me what we said and when we said it, give us a timestamp and we'll cut it out.
Yeah, the warning said contradicting health authorities. When we used the health authorities numbers, we said what they said.
Yeah.
Just in a place where you don't have to go digging for it. We did the digging and gave the information.
It's not like, and I've seen this, not on YouTube, obviously, but I have seen and heard from, the more right-wing talking heads of, here are their numbers, but then let me pull out this study to show that they're wrong. We didn't do that.
Nope.
Because that was not our point or our intention. Again, we use that as the foundation to talk about policy, public policy.
Maybe it was the title. I did go for a clickbait title, so maybe if I reposted it with a different title, something will, or the cover photo, the thumbnail.
That thumbnail was awesome. I love.
By the way, I got your book. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So
I didn't want to show the front because if that is, you're not allowed to. Maybe that's because we had that certain person who is the science. Everybody knows who we're talking about now.
The science.
Who is the science on the thumbnail photo. Maybe that was what they meant by contradicting authorities, because it was a satirical photo of that individual. Because he is the science. He is the authority.
Judge Science.
Yeah. Oh.
For all 11 listeners, if you don't know who the science, I'm parroting the law from Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
Go watch Dredd. It was like 2011. Carl Urban. It was freaking awesome. I think it's still available on a couple of streaming services.
All right. So what do we want to talk about today?
All right. Well, buckle up, kids, because it's about to get really dark.
Yeah, I did pour a drink for this one.
So I mentioned this in the video that only 11 of you saw anyway, so I guess I don't have to go where I was going to go.
This is what I brought up the likes, because it's not just like, yeah, us. It's a good ratio. 3 likes for 11 views is pretty good, and it actually means that I can't even look at it right now. The runtime, how long they actually watch the video, versus click on it and like, I don't like this and go.
Yeah.
So that means people actually watched it at least most of the way through.
I'd mentioned something that about the history of this virus and the currently approved treatment. I mean, crying out loud, can we say the word vaccine, or are we going to get in trouble? But I'd mentioned something about that was disturbing to me, and I thought would raise eyebrows among others too. But in going down that road, I went down a very dark rabbit hole. History repeats itself because no one was paying attention. History also repeats itself because there are people who seem to think that the warnings of the past were actually instruction manuals. There's a great, I think I've referenced it before, that something I was watching recently was, oh crap, I just forgot the title. It's narrated by Peter Dinklage. It's on Netflix, and the title is something like How to Be a Dictator. And it's I think like 5 or 6 episodes long, and it focuses on one particular horrible dictator in the past, and on one particular method that they use to consolidate their power. And so if you're interested in history and have a dark sense of humor, like we kind of do, you'll like the show. Unfortunately, I think there are people who use things like that as instruction manuals. I've ranted before. We say never again about the Holocaust, except it had already happened. the Armenian genocide, which we're not allowed to talk about either because Turkey gets mad.
You know, let me compare this to a TV show that would be a good analogy. If you haven't seen the show, it only has 2 seasons, so it's a pretty quick binge. Mindhunter, and it's about the FBI back in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s, with the they make it around one guy, but I'm sure there was a whole department on this, where they started studying serial killers to counter serial killers. So he had the idea to interview these people, starting with Kemper, and so they were using the bad people to figure out how to find bad people before bad things happen. So now we can look at past dictators and say, well, how did they do it? So we can say, oh, well, this pattern leads to this. We want to prevent this. We don't want that. And I think that's what you're getting at, to some degree, at least.
All right. So here's where we're going to start. And the point of this, the theme of this, is that these people cannot be trusted. So when it comes to, look, we don't have to get into a scientific argument, and by our own admission, we are lay people. You can understand the witchcraft, and so you can translate some of the science speak into real people speak. And so we do talk about the science in that regard. But we don't even have to get into a scientific debate when what we're talking about here is policy, and the people in charge of the policy cannot be trusted. Let's go into the way. Let's talk about Dr. Anthony Fauci. This is a
oh, you are going to get us banned. We're not allowed to talk about it. It's contradicting authorities. We are not contradicting anything he says. We're just talking about the man as a person.
I'm just talking about history. I'm a historian. I'm talking about history. This is an opinion piece from the Huffington Post, pretty mainstream news organization. Dr. Anthony Fauci is rewriting history. He is doing so to disguise his shameful role in delaying promotion of an AIDS treatment that would have prevented tens of thousands of deaths in the first years of the epidemic. In my book, Body Counts, the Memoir of Politics, Sex, AIDS, and Survival, I recount how slow the federal government was in publicizing the use of Bactrim and other sulfa drugs to prevent PCP, the pneumonia that was the leading killer of people with AIDS, in addition to its long time and well-known use to treat PCP. I point to Dr. Fauci in particular because he was and remains today the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and the head of the federal government AIDS research program. In 1987, AIDS activist Michael Callan begged Fauci to help in promoting the use of Bactrim as PCP prophylaxis and issuing interim guidelines urging physicians to prophylax those patients deemed at high risk of PCP. Had Fauci listened to people with AIDS and the clinicians treating them and responded accordingly, he would have saved thousands of lives. In the 2 years between 1987, when Callan met with Fauci, in 1989, when the guidelines were ultimately issued, nearly 17,000 people with AIDS suffocated from PCP. Most of these people might have lived had Fauci responded appropriately.
Well, remember, in the early days of it, he said you could get it by being in the same house.
Yep, you can find that video. Just search Fauci AIDS close contact, and you will find the video interview of him from the 80s saying that he was concerned about the spread from close contact. Fauci refused to acknowledge the evidence, and according to one account, even encouraged people with AIDS to stop taking treatments like Bactrim that weren't specifically approved for use in people with AIDS. Again, Bactrim was a well-established, long-used treatment for a particular kind of pneumonia. And in fact, let me actually jump back up to this paragraph here. So it was well known, it was well used, and had a suggested use of whenever the reoccurrence rate of PCP was over 15%. Sonnabend and community clinicians had demonstrated that the recurrence rate of PCP and AIDS was over 60% in the year following the first episode. And for anyone who was old enough to have been paying attention to the news at the time, the primary killer of people with AIDS was pneumonia in the early years, because of the weakened immune system. And pneumonia can be a very dangerous disease because it destroys your lungs. You can't breathe.
It's almost like it's the primary killer of people with another disease that we shall not name at this time.
Longtime treatment activist Richard Jeffries wrote in 2001 that Fauci went as far as telling activists attending a 1987 meeting that there was no data to suggest PCP prophylaxis was beneficial and that it may in fact be dangerous. Again, no data, meaning there weren't double-blind placebo-controlled studies in medical journals. Well, yeah, because this epidemic had only really been, I think the first cases of quote unquote gay cancer, literally that's what it was called at the beginning. I want to say 78 or 79 is when it first popped up and people started going, huh. But I think about 83, 84 is when it really started to spread in Western communities and really started to get people's attention, and the big public pushes for work on AIDS treatments started 85 to 87. Okay, so this is a meeting in 1987. Yeah, there's no data in a medical journal. One, because there hasn't been time to do those studies, and two, there isn't time because people are dying very fast. Fauci's close colleague, Dr. Samuel Broder, who was head of the National Cancer Institute, even suggested, in the absence of any evidence at all, that the newly introduced antiretroviral AZT would make prophylaxis against PCP redundant. Remember that name, AZT, because we'll get to that in a second. Now, last thing I want to say about this article, before anyone thinks that we're politicizing current events. This was originally published in 2014. How has this man been the head of this large bureaucracy, the highest paid bureaucrat in the federal government for this long, when people have been talking about his terrible decisions for this long? Any thoughts on that one before I move on?
It could be the simple old adage, screw ups move up.
Well, it makes me wonder how he got the position in the first place, because it was around that time, 87, so 85 to 87, somewhere in there.
Well, we do tend to have a bias towards negative news, especially given the current situation. I'm trying to think who it was that I heard talking about him in the past. I think it was Dr. Drew in an interview with GadSad, where he was actually talking about how brilliant the man is and how he can't believe that he's acting the way he is right now. So from past things. So that might be a better source to go. Maybe we all need to do a little bit more homework on that. But at the same time, we're seeing that, and then we're seeing what's going on now. And we do have that negativity bias that Steven Pinker talks about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter because yeah, it is a bias, but it is the current situation. And yes, biases exist for a reason, because they help us with judgment.
Yes. And I will say, if anyone has been actually watched all our videos months back,
who's put up with us for that long?
Months back, when the Fauci emails were first released under that FOIA request, and I went through a bunch of them and I talked about them, and I said that I actually felt sorry for Dr. Fauci, because there were and the example I gave is I came across a number of emails where just normal Joe Blows had found his email and sent him questions as a public health expert and concerns that they had, and he took the time to respond and give medical advice to these regular random people.
Mhm.
And I found that to be um a very positive point of character in his favor. I have now grown to despise the man.
Well, there's so I like to give people the benefit of the doubt,
Mm-hmm.
even though I understand there's shitty people in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so giving him the benefit of the doubt, but understanding there's shitty people in the world, we don't know that there's a proverbial, not hypothetical, figurative gun to his head. He may be the face of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing that with a certain trial right now. How many people are in that black book, right? So we don't know what's behind. He may be just the person trying to do the damage control, and he's got nothing for us. So he just relies on, I'm the expert, listen to me. You can't contradict me. So again, he may be that person we're talking about. He may have that person behind him ready to pull the trigger in some way, figurative way of shape or form. So there may be a lot of them. They may be all in it together. So there's all of those options.
I have I don't have a lot of sympathy though for that kind of an argument. Like I said during the Afghanistan debacle, that there comes a time where you put your resignation on the table and you take the consequences that come with that, so you can say publicly, I'm not going to be a part of this because it's wrong. And we're going to get down that rabbit hole because it gets worse. That was just the setup here for Fauci and AIDS. I do want to point out, because you brought up his comments on close contact, one of the reasons the AIDS epidemic, the publicity and the policy around it became what it was because the gay community, which was a legitimately marginalized community at that time, for sure. This isn't the modern rainbow mafia and they're taking offense at everything. They were a legitimately marginalized community at that time. And there was backlash and damage done to these people because of fear of the contraction of HIV.
Well, this is a testament to actually what makes America great. Think of that exact same thing. We got this deadly disease spreading more in one community than anywhere else. And we look at what happened in the 1930s and how that all started. That could have easily gone into a quarantine, into a push this population out and eradicate this population situation. It very easily could have, because of how serious AIDS is. We're actually seeing a bigger response in that direction to something not nearly as serious as AIDS, and without nearly as clear of a border of who is the more affected community. So
I am curious if anyone out there who wants to comment was born in the 90s, especially in the later 90s or later, do you even think about AIDS? Is AIDS something you worry about? Is AIDS something you fear? Because if you were around during the 80s, it was something that,
yeah, and I remember, we're in the 90s. You and I are just coming to that viable age where we're wanting to do certain things, and it was still on the mind.
Yes,
and it wasn't because of what was going on in the 90s. It was because our understanding of it from when we were growing up in the 80s.
It was a major factor in putting sex education in schools, because contracting HIV was a death sentence. And I don't know if people feel that way anymore, because treatment drugs have been developed where, when did Magic Johnson announce that he had AIDS? Wasn't that like 88? Because wasn't he on the original Dream Team, which was Soul 88? Because there was concern about that. He's still around. He looks healthier now than he did then.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories about that. As in, he became a face of something just to get the word out. But I don't know. It doesn't matter. He did get the word out.
Yep.
Personally, I don't think if it matters. This would be a noble lie if it was true. If the lie was true,
But
not the truth was
part
true.
part
So,
of the reason there became such fear and animosity against the gay community is because that's where it started. But
mhm,
people like Fauci saying this may be able to be spread by close contact. There
mhm,
were a lot of things that had to be debunked. And for a long time, for years, public service ads had to be run to let people know you cannot contract HIV from a handshake,
mhm.
from a hug, from a toilet seat. That sounds insane now, but people were legitimately concerned. I'm afraid to go into a public bathroom because I might contract AIDS from sitting on a toilet seat.
Well, and
That
this is
came.
this is where science was successful too, because there were actual medical scientists out there, not the figureheads like Fauci, but going, why is this spread in the gay community? Oh, look, it's actually more common in the male gay community. So, what's the difference between a male homosexual and a female homosexual? The way you do it, right? So, and then they kind of went down that rabbit hole, and oh, there is a certain kind of contact that has a higher degree of sharing fluids into your bloodstream. Oh, maybe that might be the key. And then they kind of kept going down that path until they said, oh, this is a bloodborne disease that it takes this kind of contact to contract.
So Fauci helped with the spread of fear and hysteria. Then he also helped in the terrible treatments. I brought up Dallas Buyers Club for a reason when we were talking with Steven, and that's what that movie was talking about was uh, people like Fauci and these bureaucracies that we have things called right to try now. We have laws called right to try because of what was done to people with AIDS in the 80s and how they were not allowed to try different types of therapeutics.
Mhm.
It gets worse. All right. So this is an article from Spin Magazine written in 2015. And it was a retrospective. It was part of a retrospective of uh, uh, AIDS coverage because Spin Magazine was one of the early popular mainstream publications to really start covering in depth the AIDS epidemic. At the end of 1989, 2 years after we had started the highly controversial AIDS column in Spin, we published an article by Celia Farber called Sins of Omission about the truly bad and corrupt science surrounding promoting AZT. Remember that from before, where
Mhm.
they wouldn't approve Bactrim and didn't recommend that. In fact, said don't use it, and a preference for this drug called AZT as treatment for the syndrome of diseases. Celia was the editor and frequent writer of the column and unearthed hard evidence of the cold-bloodedness of the AIDS establishment pushing a drug that was worse than the disease and killed faster than the natural progression of AIDS left untreated. AZT had been an abandoned cancer drug, discarded because of its fatal toxicity, resurrected in the cynical belief that AIDS patients were going to die anyway. So trying it out was sort of like playing with the house's money. Because the drug didn't require the usual massively expensive research and trial processes, having gone through that years earlier, it was insanely profitable for its maker, Burroughs Wellcome. It was a tragically perfect storm of windfall profits, something to pacify AIDS activists in the media, and a convenient boom for the patent holder of HIV testing. This piece very literally changed the media's view of AIDS and sharpened their discerning and skeptical eye. And soon after, AZT was once again shelved, hopefully this time forever. Spoiler alert, we're going to come back to that again.
Ugh.
So I'm not going to read too much of this, but basically, there is it is not a conspiracy. Well, it is still theory because I don't know how much hard evidence we have, but
Well, that's
AZ,
the it's a hypothesis.
Yes,
Theory is a hypothesis that is stood the test of time.
there's a strong hypothesis this was all about money, because AZT was incredibly expensive, as all drugs are, was incredibly expensive to get up to the implementation point. And it was incredibly expensive to manufacture. So it was highly profitable. And this British drug company really wanted to get this drug out there. It caused all sorts of side effects. So this pretty well known bad drug was pushed on the AIDS community, knowing it was bad. Again, it had been pulled from cancer treatment. Chemotherapy is literally poison, but we do that for cancer because it kills the cancer, and the cancer is worse. So think about that. A drug so bad it couldn't be used to treat cancer. That's how bad the side effects were. And that was being pushed instead of this long established drug, which was very cheap and readily available and could have been used as part of a regimen to treat AIDS. Because again, HIV doesn't kill you, it destroys your immune system, and then other things kill you. So you are treated with a cocktail of things to combat all of the symptoms, so that those symptoms don't grow severe enough to kill you. Is any of this sounding familiar to anything else that we have been talking about?
Yeah, well, I can give a personal anecdote to discussions with a doctor and treatments and the patient's choice based on side effects. The people that have watched all our episodes know I have a heart condition. And if you're just watching this one for the first time, I have a heart condition I was born with. And one of the things I need to be doing is taking some sort of blood thinner, because I have a faulty aortic valve. And so what happens is, because when the heart pumps, some blood comes out, some comes back in before it goes into the body. So it's kind of a regurgitation back into the heart, and it pools. Like if you've ever been in a river and you see that one little spot where the water just kind of swirls around for a second, and that can coagulate. So someone with my condition needs to take some sort of blood thinner. Now, different blood thinners work different ways, and the best one for the coagulation, like aspirin is a blood thinner, right? But it doesn't help as well with that coagulation versus just blood clots. So there is a prescription medication, and there's only one. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to get busted for some sort of something that's going to pull our video down. It starts with an E, but it actually works better for the coagulation. But when I took it, I had one of the rare side effects of the drug, where you're basically, it's similar to akaphasia. It's where you're basically pins and needles. So, lay on your arm for a minute, get it out, and that coming back to blood flow, where you get those painful pins and needles. Well, I was basically in constant head to toe pain, mild pain all day long from it. And so I made the choice that I would rather have this slightly greater risk of the stroke by taking aspirin, but to not be in pain 24/7. So that was a discussion between me and my doctor through self-experiment, and we got the medication as right as we can. So slightly higher stroke risk. I'm willing to take that risk because I don't want to be in pain 24/7. And that's how this should work.
Yeah, because everything is a trade-off, right? There are no solutions, only trade-offs. That is especially true when it comes to medicine and health.
Well, and let's kind of put this in the current environment. Say this was the argument of the day, and I'm talking to someone and I say, well, I take the aspirin instead of that other medicine. They say, what, do you want a stroke? You're going to die. And no, I have slightly increased risk just because of something I was born with. No, I don't want a stroke, but I also don't want to be in pain 24/7.
Yeah. Yep. So you've got to balance these several factors, and you decide, okay, this is the one that has more reward for the risk. So staying on this spin article, there are some things, a couple things I want to point out before I move on to something else. That the Burroughs Wellcome, the drug company, and the NIH, the National Institute of Health in Britain, government-controlled medical system, had published a study that was basically just a press kit touting the benefits of AZT. But then a better study, a more legitimate study, frankly, was published in the Lancet that had not been done in the United States or Britain, but in France, and it called their result. So Burroughs Wellcome had called their results overwhelmingly positive. French doctors called theirs disappointing. The French study found once again that AZT was too toxic for most to tolerate, had no lasting effect on HIV blood levels, and left the patients with fewer T4 cells than they started with. I'd call that a little more than disappointing, but to each their own. Although they noticed a clinical improvement at first, they concluded that by 6 months, these values had returned to their pre-treatment levels, and several opportunistic infections, malignancies, and deaths occurred. While the Lancet study was showing that, the powers that be were recommending AZT for asymptomatic HIV positive patients. The news that AZT will soon be prescribed to asymptomatic people. Again, this is an article from 1989, so this isn't, current. When I say soon be, has left many leading AIDS doctors dumbfounded and furious. Every doctor and scientist I asked felt that it was highly unprofessional and reckless to announce a study with no data to look at, making recommendations with such drastic public health implications. This simply does not happen, said Bialy, the doctor that was interviewed for this, treating AIDS patients. The government is reporting scientific facts before they've been reviewed. It's unheard of. It's beyond belief, said another doctor treating AIDS patients. I don't know what to do. I have to go in and face an office full of people asking for AZT because it was being pushed by the powers that be as a cure, despite all the side effects I just talked about. I don't know what to do as a responsible physician. The first study was ridiculous. It's so on and so on. So this drug is being pushed despite the fact that there are cheaper, more well-established alternatives that have had the long-term studies because they've been around a long time. And this other thing, which will make a buttload of money for the pharmaceutical company that produces it.
Oh. Trying to think where to go with this, because I know some of the stuff I brought for today with what I sent you, the conversation with a client. But I think I'm going to go here first. Hold on.
Oh, good, because I'm about to get, so remember how I said it was going to get dark? So we've kind of been going down. We're about to nosedive.
Okay, no, I'm going to go with the client first then, because I think what I'm going to bring up is just going to be kind of like a little cherry on top of what you're saying. Where's that tab before I go? Here we go. Okay. All right. So I have a client that works for a major company that makes chemicals, and he's a pretty high up exec in that company. I'm not going to name the company. Again, we want to keep our legal costs as low as possible. We want to keep them zero. But he sent me a text. Let me just read the text. I'm not going to share the pictures because I took the screenshot without taking his name off. But Where's it at? Oh, I talked to a lot of people. Hold on. This is the season. This is the time of year where I do a lot of more business because kids are out of school. So there is a lot of that going on. Okay, so the original text he sent me was, so had a call at work, a conference call on the pharmaceutical, insert other word for that, mandate today. And so the company is considering a mandate on their employees for this certain pharmaceutical. And the question was asked about natural immunity. They cited a Northwestern study that said some folks with mild infection lose immunity in as little as 3 months, as opposed to the vaccine that has proven to give long-term immune response, and they know when to give a booster. So that was the result of the call on natural immunity. And then I responded, I'll try to find the study. Do you want the large scale studies that show the opposite of that, which we have as well, or is it too late? And he said, too late for a rebuttal. And I said, did anyone come prepared to debate the negative on the call, or was it just someone talking to y'all and talking to the audience with zero challenge? And he said, zero challenge and handpicked Q&A. And I went on about I'd probably be fired because I would have filed complaints and spoke up. So that's why I'm glad I work for myself. And then I found the study. And here we go. Share screen. Well, here's an article about the study first. This is in Science Daily. So we're looking at a major scientific publication. Recovering from COVID-19 doesn't guarantee antibodies or confer immunity to reinfection. Pay attention to that title, because what do you get from that title? Exactly what the presenter said, right? And you can go through and they just go into more detail. So at the very bottom, if you don't know where to look, there's the actual study. So we brought it up. This is the study they're going by. Yeah, here we go. What did this study actually do, and what did it test for? And who did they study? So we got to the results. I'm not going to read through there. I'm going to go to the methods. Where was the methods? Okay, so they had 27 study participants. So here we go. This is our study. This major United States company that has offices all over the place, probably about 20 or 30,000 employees, is making a decision based on a presentation around this study. 27 participants. And remember the ones I brought up in previous episodes, which are 800,000 participants, 52,000 participants, talking about natural infection. So they got these together. Of those 27 participants, where's it at? 4 individuals had COVID before. 4. And remember this headline. Remember this headline and the statements made by it. 4 out of 27 have had COVID before. So first of all, you're in as 4. If you're going to make that statement, one person with an immune disorder skews the results by 25%. Right? So that's why the number of participants is so important, because you need enough participants to wash out any outliers. Yep. And one outlier can skew your results. Okay, so that's problem number 1. Very few participants to begin with. Only 4 would even qualify for making the statements being made in a scientific magazine and for decisions to create mandates for thousands of people. All right. Now, what did they actually test for? Oh, wait, every participant was vaccinated. All 27 took the vaccine, and they followed prospectively along after that. So they took their antibodies before. They gave them the first dose. They took antibodies before the second dose, gave them the second dose, and took antibodies twice more. That's how they ran this study. So they They took samples after the first dose. So they gave them a dose and tested the samples. Then they took 2 more after the second dose to see how long those responses lasted. So nobody was tested that had just previous infection and no vaccine. Not a single person was tested for this. So this statement made wasn't even tested in the study they cite. But wait, there's more. Let's go all the way down to the bottom. So what they did is the test they did is they did an antibody test, and they also did a response to the spike protein in the Petri dish. So how did those antibodies actually respond? And they also use variants. So these are the different variants they used. Okay, so I believe this is alpha, this is, I think, beta, and I want to say
Are they
that's delta.
seriously calling the original the wild type?
Yes.
Still?
Well, that's the technical term for it.
Okay.
Yeah, that is the technical term for it. Okay, so now we get to the results. Where is it? Man, I lost my spot in here, but the results were the 4 that had a positive COVID result before actually had the best result versus the different variants. So
I'm confused about something here. I thought you had talked about this previously. So explain to me the witchcraft here. Why are they talking about antibodies? Because I thought the way things worked is, yes, the antibodies always eventually go away. You don't have measles antibodies floating around in your bloodstream because you got the measles vaccine or because you got measles. Those eventually go away. What you have is, what is it?
T-cell memory.
The T-cell memory. And I thought there was another thing responsible for the memory and then the production of antibodies.
B cells
your
produce
body,
the antibodies. Yeah.
Yeah. When your body encounters this thing that it knows because it's encountered it before, then it produces the antibodies to destroy that invasive organism.
Yeah. So initially you have the antibody response. So you have a spike there. That's what happens when you get a vaccine or you get a disease. You have that spike in antibodies, takes care of the disease at the moment. And you develop B cell memory, which are the B cells are the ones that create the antibodies. And then you develop T4 cells, so T4 cells, which are the helper cells. They help the B cells and the antibodies do their job, and the CD8 cells, which are the natural killer cells. So the B cells will create the antibodies. Those T8 cells actually, so the antibodies will fight the virus itself. Yeah. Will attach to the spike protein, for instance, and do that. But the T cell will actually come in. They call them killer cells because they'll come in and they'll actually eat an infected cell and destroy an infected cell. So there's multiple lines of defense there, and the longest lasting is the memory of the B cells and those CD4, CD8 cells. So the actual antibodies in the system is just a measure, but it is not the ultimate measure. No. But what I finally found it here, neutralization of all the variants was higher in pre-vaccinated PCR positive cases in comparison with negative patients. So the only thing this study shows is a timeline for the waning of effectiveness, which I'm going to be very careful here because let's bring up those freaking rules again. We can't claiming that they do not reduce transmission or contract disease, or there was something in there about effectiveness. Okay, so no, we aren't going to be breaking the rules because it is accepted that the effectiveness does wane over time.
I'm crying out loud. That's why they're talking about a 4th booster in Israel.
Where was I at? Here we go. Okay, sorry for all the clicking back and forth there, but so the only thing this study shows with a very small number of participants is we do see a waning effectiveness over 3 months of the initial immunity, the power of the immunity. Whether it's still enough to survive the disease, we don't know. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? But the only thing this actually shows is the opposite of the headline, that if you had the disease before and you get vaccinated, you get the best results.
Which was a major talking point early on with the vaccines. And we showed some of those studies.
But what this does not do is address the headline. What it does not do is compare people who had it before, didn't get an extra inoculation, and the measurements from there. It does not show that at all, but they are making that claim in a major scientific magazine because it has the right agenda. That's what I wanted to address, because now we've got a company, and that uncontested, that's the argument for mandating a medical procedure for all the employees.
Going back to our history lesson, the NIH and the pharmaceutical company pushed out studies that were overwhelmingly positive and completely ignored a French study in the Lancet, well-respected medical journal, that showed very different results, and was a longer-term study.
But now we're talking about the witchcraft versus what you get. You're not me who reads the actual studies.
No,
you're the person who reads just the Science Daily article. You got everything you need. I did my research.
Yep.
I did my research. Science Daily, respectable. Used to be.
Yeah.
Until I read that article. But yeah, this is it's a pretty shitty situation when it comes to the whole debate on this. Again, it was uncontested and handpicked Q&A and misrepresentation all in one.
And again, this is why it's so infuriating that the public debate about public policy is being censored, because I don't understand the witchcraft like most people. And so I'm going to read the Science Daily article and say, if someone else isn't free to come along with a rebuttal article and say, no, here's why, here's what the study, here's what the study really says when you dig into it, citation, here are some other studies, citation. If you're not free to explain that, then there is only one side getting through, and no one ever hears from somebody who knows what they're talking about with citations.
Well, let's look at one of the great things about our legal system. Okay, there's a lot of shitty things in it that are corrupt, but they're actually outside of how it's designed. The way it's designed, say we've got a criminal case, you've got a defense lawyer and a prosecution. And you've got a prosecution doing everything they can to win the case, right? Within the law, right? Everything they can to prove their side. But you also, on the other end, even if this person thinks their client is guilty, is doing everything they can to defend them. And in this debate, we should have two sides like that. It doesn't matter my opinion. If I can bring up, if I'm assigned the negative, I'm going to do everything I can to show the negative. Whereas someone is on the positive, they're going to do everything. And then we get to come to a decision based on two people doing all they can to defend their position. And that's how it should be. Not, I have the moral authority here for my position.
It's a show trial. This is what happens in communist countries. This is what happened in the trials of dissidents in Maoist China, or current China, for crying out loud, or what happened with enemies of Stalin. You are brought before a court, but only the state is making its case.
Yeah, and when you have those two sides, what you can be confident is a proper verdict. Because if you've got this person defending with everything they have, every bit of brain cell they have, someone even they may think is guilty, then if that person ends up being guilty, you can be confident in that verdict. And this is one of the failings in the past, is you would have defense lawyers not defending their clients because of whatever their race, ethnicity, their gender, or whatever. So when you have that in place and we have that argument, then you can be more confident in the end product. Like you brought up those two drugs, one that was working, one that wasn't, but one had the money behind it. Had there been a public debate with two entities, it could be multiple people fighting for everything they have to prove their point to the public, the truth would have gotten out.
Yeah. Well, the enemy of the truth is
Money.
evil.
Yeah.
I don't use that word lightly. I started off with the powers that be cannot be trusted. This is where we get into, oh, okay.
Is this the direction you're going? We can bring this back up later.
It's going to get worse. No,
it's going to get worse. Okay.
It's going to get worse. But that's a good setup for where I'm going. I don't use the word evil lightly. This is evil. Liam Sheff is an independent investigative journalist. He's been published in numerous mainstream publications. He did an investigation in 2003 or 2004. He published this online himself. It was later picked up by New York Press, New York Times, Associated Press, and others who did further investigations. It served as the basis of investigation for the BBC film Guinea Pig Kids. If you search BBC Guinea Pig Kids, you will find it. It's only 26 minutes long. It will make you want to start an armed revolt. In New York's Washington Heights is a 4-story brick building called Incarnation Children's Center. This former convent houses a revolving stable of children who've been removed from their own homes by the Agency for Child Services. These children are Black, Hispanic, and poor. Many of their mothers had a history of drug abuse and have died. Once taken into ICC, the children become subjects of drug trials sponsored by NIAID, National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, a division of NIH, National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, in conjunction with some of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer, Genentech, Chiron Biosine, and others. Merck is on that list too, by the way. Just saying. The drugs being given to the children are toxic. They're known to cause genetic mutation, organ failure, bone marrow death, bodily deformations, brain damage, and fatal skin disorders. If the children refuse the drugs, they're held down and have them force fed. If the children continue to resist, they're taken to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where a surgeon puts a plastic tube through their abdominal wall into their stomachs. From then on, the drugs are injected directly into their intestines. In 2003, 2 children, ages 6 and 12, had debilitating strokes due to drug toxicities. The 6-year-old went blind. They both died shortly after. Another 14-year-old recently died. An 8-year-old boy had 2 plastic surgeries to remove large, fatty, drug-induced lumps from his necks. This isn't science fiction. This is AIDS research. The children at ICC were born to mothers who tested HIV positive or who themselves tested positive. However, neither parents nor children were told a crucial fact. HIV tests are extremely inaccurate. The HIV test cross-reacts with nearly 70 commonly occurring conditions, giving false positive results, etc., etc. The point of that is that the HIV positive test is something that is used by ACS to take children away from their parents. You're HIV positive, you gave this to your child, we're taking your child away, and oh, by the way, now we're going to put them in pharmaceutical experiments.
When is this? 2000, early 2000s,
This was published in 2004, originally published in 2004.
and it was still going on when it was published, or it was.
Yo, it was still going on. Yeah.
It's not going on now, right?
I don't know. Yeah, I can't tell you. I don't know. I've been looking for follow-up on it. I would not be surprised if it mutated and went somewhere else. And I'll get to that in a second. Here are the drugs that are being used. Retrovir, AZT. Remember our old friend
Makes sense.
AZT?
Yeah.
Still going on. Known toxicities, hemotoxic toxicity, muscle wasting, liver swelling, fat degeneration, Epivir, known toxicities, pancreatitis, as well as previous ones. This one, fatal lactic acidosis, has been reported in pregnant women, along with see above. Nevirapine. Patients should be informed of the possibility of severe liver disease or skin reactions. Okay, that's putting it mildly. There's a syndrome that can happen with this drug, which causes such severe rashes that your skin starts to slough off.
Well, and liver disease, that just opens you up to any toxin after that.
Marinate on that picture, folks.
Oh,
This is the nevirapine. This is what it can do.
we should have given a disclaimer on that one.
Now, I didn't want to. I'm being a bastard on purpose because this is evil. Okay. And he goes into, he interviews a number of people who were subjected to this. He interviews the medical director of ICC, who says, well, yeah, you know, it's a trial. These things happen. We're trying to help, blah, blah, blah. No self-awareness of what's happening here. So there was a report that was issued in 2009 that determined that 80 New York City foster children died in drug trials. Here's one of the kickers here. ACS, again, the department in New York City in charge of children, of taking children away from the parents, stated separate consent need not be obtained for each child. So what they did is they had a medical ethics board approve these drug trials, these experiments. Let's not call them trials. They're experiments, these drug experiments on children. Once that was approved, then any HIV positive child who is taken into custody can then go into the trial. They don't have to get approval for each individual, that is literally a crime against humanity. That is literally a war crime. I'll get to that in a second. It gets worse. How can this possibly get worse? Well, it does. So if you watch the Guinea Pig Kids documentary, they explain how the process works, and the people on the board of medical ethics who approved these experiments were the people conducting the experiments.
No conflict of interest there at all.
And again, how this all ties together with the evil. This BBC documentary aired once, and then it was pulled from the BBC. You can't find, it was never aired again on the BBC, and you can't find it on the BBC archives. You can find it in a couple places on YouTube. And if you find this, if you go to this this page here, they link to it, and that's where I watched it from, as well as you can find full transcripts. It was pulled once at the behest of the powers that be and the pharmaceutical companies. Again, you can find this, you can find these transcripts. And just so you know, these aren't just some small time hacks trying to be sensationalist. Here's an article from NBC News from 2005 talking about it. They put a disturbingly positive spin on it, like it's not that big a deal, which creeps the hell out of me, as well as it was going on elsewhere, including here in Texas. So that's what makes me go, I don't know if this is still going on or not, because it was already happening in multiple states. So maybe this particular set of trials was shut down in New York City. Maybe they moved somewhere else. I don't know, but it's creepy as hell, especially when you consider the picture I showed earlier. This is why I say it's evil.
A long report written in July 1942 by Rasher and by the defendants Ruff and Romberg describes an experiment on a former delicatessen clerk who was given an oxygen mask and raised in the chamber to an atmospheric elevation of over 47,000 feet, at which point the mask was removed and a parachute descent was simulated. The report describes the victim's reactions: spasmodic convulsions, agonal convulsive breathing, chronic convulsions and groaning. The yells aloud, convulses arms and legs, grimaces, bites his tongue, does not respond to speech, gives the impression of someone who is completely out of his mind. The evidence which we will produce will establish that the defendants Rupp and Romberg personally participated with Rasher in experiments resulting in death and torture, that the defendant Zegers watched the experiments for an entire day and made an oral report to Himmler on his observations, that the defendant Rudolf Brandt was the agent of Himmler in providing the human subjects for these experiments and in making many other facilities available to Rasher and rendering him general assistance, and that the defendant Veltz, in his official capacity, repeatedly insisted on supervision over and full responsibility and credit for the experiments.
This is from the Holocaust Memorial Museum, and you can find lots of disturbing pictures because the Nazis well documented their torturous experiments. So the most famous trials are of course the big one of Himmler, Goering et al., the surviving members of the Upper Circle. But there were a number of trials, and this is from the opening statement from the trial of the medical doctors who were performing experiments on people in concentration camps. I've mentioned before the Nazi T4 program, which was basically the beta version of the Holocaust. It was the undesirables. It was the mentally and physically impaired gypsies, political prisoners, all these other people that were lesser for one degree or another. It wasn't to the full extent of, all Jews yet. So it was people that were easier to sell to the public that, well, so someone with a severe mental handicap, and what kind of life can they have anyway? And so they were either euthanized or they had experiments done on them because they could, because like the HIV article I shared earlier, hey, these people are going to die anyway, so why not try out these drugs on them? And then it just metastasized from there. I've been to Dachau, which was one of the ones where a lot of this happened. It wasn't, one of the major Jewish extermination camps. Those were mostly in the East, in Poland and elsewhere. But Dachau had lots of pictures in the main building is preserved. The main office complex is preserved, and they have, it's just a gallery of blown up black and white pictures that these experimenters took themselves during their experiments. And it's pretty freaking horrific. And
well, you look at past experiments and it's really tough because of so many things we benefit from now that are the result of some of this just sheer nastiness that happened in the past. Look at some of the old Russian sleep studies. Look up those and how horrible those were, keeping people awake for 15 days and they start eating themselves. And or even on a milder note, it was in the 50s, I think, they did they had studies where they did the people were the prisoners and people were the cops, and you can't strike anybody, but anything else goes if you're the guards. And the creative ways these guards ended up torturing the people in the prison was I mean, none of this stuff would ever get past an ethics board right now. I remember when I was in grad school, I wanted to do a lifting study on hypertrophy, which is the muscle growth, and just the fact that it would have taken a mild blood draw, which is would have been just basically a stick of the finger. I had to put it, that it ended up not being done because there was so much paperwork, and the university just didn't want to do that a study that involved blood draw. So it was so I ended up piggybacking on another grad project, but yeah, just the amount of red tape we have to go through for anything involving humans.
Yeah. Because you don't want to start going down that road.
Well, and when we talk about very bad people, you just brought up an example of what someone with my scientific mind but a sociopathic tendency would do, because there are scientists out there that have theories, and you really would need human subjects to test those theories, and they in their mind think they're doing it for the greater good, but it would take that sacrifice along the way, and I've got a stop valve because I have empathy. But if you lack empathy of any kind, which you would as a socio or psychopath, it's about 3% of the population, so you could probably assume it's 3% of the scientific population as well. What steps are they willing to do? And we just saw some.
And the reason I ended with this is because I'd mentioned before that what was being done to those children was a literal war crime. I mean, it's out of the doctor's trial, as it's called. If you search, Holocaust doctor's trial or whatever, you'll find more information than you ever wanted to know about this stuff. But out of that came what is called the Nuremberg Code, because these trials were held in Nuremberg. The first point on the Nuremberg Code is where we get the idea of informed consent, which is the legal term we use now. The number one point is the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The ninth point is, during the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. The children that were being given these drugs had no informed consent. It was done for them maliciously, for profit, and they were not allowed to end. So go watch Guinea Pig Kids, and they talk to a pediatric nurse who was part of these experiments until she realized how horrible they were. And they talk to a grandmother whose daughter abused drugs, was HIV positive, died, and she was taking care of the kids. But they had been part of this foster system, and so they had been put into this trial, or her grandson had been put into this trial. And he was supposed to keep taking these drugs when his grandmother took custody. They were having such terrible side effects that they stopped giving him the drugs. So ACS came back and they took the child back. So again, a complete violation of the Nuremberg Code. I mean, forget just basic human decency. I don't understand how we as a society can continue to allow crap like this to happen. I've said before that we are turning evil, and this is what I mean. One of the infuriating things, one of the many infuriating scenes in this documentary is a New York City councilman who's, outraged, and he's going to do something about it. And he's on the phone trying to work his way through this bureaucracy. Why aren't people being arrested?
Well, I'm going to make this analogous to something else. And I think it'll kind of make it more clear for people that are not quite following along. When we talk about, especially the top of the politicians, these are people that are put on the spot, and they probably get to the position they get to because they're willing to make human sacrifices for what they consider to be the good, whatever the good is, and not good in the term that was actually good, but what they think is going to benefit more people. And the analogy here is these are the same people that will send your kids to war to protect the country, so they say, right? So protect the 330 million people here by sending 300,000 to war or 30,000 to war. Those are sacrifices for the greater good, quote unquote. We did it in the early 2000s. We did it in the 1970s. We did it in the 1940s. We did it in the 19-teens. All right. And all the way back. So that decision is sacrificing some for everyone else. And what these people with these medical decisions are saying, oh, we'll sacrifice these people because we're going to learn from it to save other people. Same thing with medical decisions being made now, probably. The same mindsets there, the same people are there. Some of these are the same people. There were people that approved that. They're still in Congress and the Senate now. There's a lot of people that have been there for a very long time. But yeah, it's that same mindset. So what's the difference between sending somebody to war or sending somebody off to an experiment? One, you have to keep quiet because of those grisly videos. We as empathetic people are going to say, oh my, we can't let this happen. Whereas we see someone come back without any legs when they went to war and be like, thank you for serving our country. We're part of the problem because we have that disconnect.
Yeah. Where is, this, I'd mentioned this before and I wish I could remember more details of the event so that I could find it again. But Dr. Peterson, I want to say 2014 or 15. It was when he was on, I think it was when he was on that speaking tour with Dave Rubin. And he was in Australia. And during the Q&A session, young lady stood up to ask a question about the government doing something bad. And he said, no, stop. You did. I did. We did. Stop pushing the blame on these other people.
Mm-hmm.
If we live in a Western liberal democracy and we say the people are the government, then you take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even remember what the bad thing was that the question was about, because that wasn't important. Because what was of utmost important was the main point he was making was, whatever the bad thing is, it's on you. We are the government. So where are you pushing hard to hold people accountable? This is why we harp so much on the emergency use authorization, because there is no liability. People can't legally be held responsible. That's a problem. That means you can do whatever the hell you want. That's a problem, as we've just shown. When you are allowed to do whatever you want, people tend to do terrible, terrible things.
Well, let's go down that route. Remember in our discussion when I came back from Germany, my talk with the certain person that said, who should pay for this? It's the unvaccinated. Well, looky what's happening. That was step number 2 down that slippery slope when we showed our graph.
Mhm.
So now what happens when the first person refuses to pay that fine? Now the numbers are, depending on the story you look at, are different, but up to $15,000 a year because you are not vaccinated. When people say that's not going to happen, we said it was going to happen. It's happening. One step further down that slope.
It's not an exaggeration to call what's happening in Australia internment camps.
No, that was Austria.
I know, but I'm
Okay.
saying you're talking about the slippery slope,
Mhm.
and it's actually more advanced in Australia right now.
Yeah, because that's the next step in Austria. What happens when they refuse to pay the fine? Do you take them to jail? Do you have a special jail for them because they're dirty?
I want to say it was Tim Pool who caused a major kerfuffle because he called them concentration camps.
Yes, that was Tim Pool.
And in his, if you watch the full clip of what he's saying there, he admits, I'm purposely using extreme language because we need to wake the F up. That you know, he basically says, yeah, I know these aren't concentration camps the way we think of them, which is the Holocaust, but that doesn't mean they can't start to move that direction.
Yeah, it's not showers, it's camps.
Mm-hmm.
The distinction there. So these are concentration camps because they're concentrating people into a camp that are of this certain variety, but they're not putting them in showers. So we have to draw that line.
I meant to go down this road at a later date because this is what my master's thesis work was on. And so I have giant stacks of documentation here on my bookshelf.
Which you never show because you want to just buck the trend of having bookshelves behind you.
Yeah.
Actually, one day mine will be organized. One day.
It won't fit behind me, or I would. Because it's a really nice cedar bookshelf. It weighs 8 million pounds that my dad made, you know, like back in the 80s. So
I'm going to build in behind here. I'm going to build in a bookshelf. So for those that can see, this is a really high ceiling in here. I'm going to build it to the top and get one of those sliding ladders that goes across.
So, you're a big shot now. The reason I use the word internment camp is because in America, that should ring alarm bells because of the internment of Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. And one of the infuriating things about researching that topic was discovering that it wasn't what, I mean, clickbait has been around since before the internet. And so
well, we used to call it headlines. Yeah.
The extreme and sensational sells. Okay. Now it sells with clicks, and before it sold with headlines. Or you know, sensational claims in a book to sell your book. Well, I feel that the truth is actually worse than the caricature of what the internment camps were. But for entirely different reasons, not because they were concentration camps, which is what they've been called, which is stupid. Again, because of what concentration camp has come to mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the idea of concentration camps, I believe that word was first used in World War I by the British, who were building camps for resident German citizens who were living in Britain at the outbreak of the war, because it was a security risk to have these people running around while you're at war with that country. So they were just a concentration of these people. It later became to be known as something else. So when they were called concentration camps at that time, it was before all that. Anyway, FDR was a racist son of a bitch. He hated the Japanese already. and he was kind of looking for an excuse to do something to Japanese living in America. And I'm using my terms very precisely here, and I'll tell you why in a second. So he was already looking for an excuse, and if you look into like the memos and the writings about from meetings with FDR at the outbreak of the war, he was already looking for a reason to intern Japanese, and the military basically apparatus basically said it's not necessary and it would be more cost than it's worth. Well, then some events happened to kind of push the idea along. And so some, I feel, well-meaning people, again, well-meaning people who were thinking about the greater good recommended that we do this for some very specific reasons. And so you have these well-intentioned people making this recommendation, and then you have a racist son of a bitch who jumps right on it because he already wanted the idea. And then you had very racist politicians on the West Coast, in California especially, who had long been using the yellow menace, the yellow peril, in the same way that racist Southern politicians used black and white. Those were the racial politics of California. And so they loved the idea too. So, and here's where it gets worse in my mind, is the reason I've been saying Japanese living in America, not Japanese Americans, is because about a third of the people who were interned were legal aliens. They weren't citizens because they'd been barred from citizenship through some pretty racist laws. So we would think of them as first generation immigrants, as immigrant Americans, but legally, technically, they weren't because of some very racist laws. And that made it easier to intern these people because they weren't citizens. At least a third of them weren't citizens. About a third of them were minors. So
kids
they
in
went
cages.
along.
The original
kids in cages. Yeah. So they went along with the parents. Now there were a third who were citizens because they were second generation. They were born in America, and so how that happened is beyond belief. How you managed to get that excuse, but again, for the greater good. So they got pulled along. But what makes it so sad to me is how many of these people went along willingly and happily because of all these racial politics and racist laws. They felt they had to prove that they were good Americans. They had to prove that they were willing to do their part for the war effort. They shouldn't have had to. It was appalling. It was stupid. It was a bureaucratic waste and nightmare. For all these reasons, there was no nuance to the argument, and things were pushed in one direction by narrow-minded and narrow-focused individuals. So, I'll put FDR in the narrow-minded camp because he was a racist son of the bitch. But even the people who were well-meaning, and drawing a blank on his name, of the assistant secretary for defense, who was kind of the primary guy who got this going based on his analysis of the intelligence he was being given. Well, that intelligence was very narrowly focused. Maybe this is sounding familiar.
Yeah. Do this thing that we're saying to do because you're a good citizen.
Yep.
Don't look at the details.
Out there.
In fact, anybody who brings up the details gets blocked, gets knocked out of the conversation because you're good. Yeah. Don't look at is it doing anything. Don't look at how it may or may not harm you. Don't look at any of the data that contradicts just us saying do this. Because notice that one bullet point, or no, was it a bullet point? Hold on. It was in the warning. I don't remember if it was a bullet point. No, it's not in their actual policy. But oh, here it is. No, it doesn't say it, but the key word in the warning was contradicting medical authorities.
Mhm.
You know, the problem is we're getting just one side of the argument because they're giving their expert
Yeah.
advice, and then anybody who questions the advice is considered contradicting.
Yeah, I'll go a little deeper into my Japanese internment example. The reason the narrow focus was there is because these people were getting all their information from the Pentagon. It wasn't the Pentagon yet. The
Mhm.
Pentagon was built in the middle of the war. Anyway, but so I'll use that language so it's easy to understand. So the Pentagon people, the Washington people, were obsessed with an attack on the West Coast.
Mhm.
And those were their projections and predictions, that because the Pacific Fleet had been destroyed, or at least the battleships had been destroyed, it left the West Coast open to attack. The West Coast was vulnerable to attack. That was all they were looking at and all they were getting. Well, the people actually out on the front lines, primarily Station Hypo, the intelligence station in the Naval Intelligence Station in Honolulu, were predicting entirely different things. And they weren't the ones that were entirely right. They were the ones who, if you've watched the movie Midway, which was shockingly good, the new one, by what's his bucket, the guy who did Independence Day, which was probably his last good movie until Midway. But it was shockingly good and showed a lot of the behind the scenes stuff with the intelligence intercepts. And their analysis of their data was, no, they're not interested in attacking the West Coast of the United States. All the action is going to be out here.
Mhm.
It's going to be in the South and Southwest Pacific as they move south, and there's going to be a push into the Central Pacific a little later. They were entirely correct. That information was not getting through due to personal animosity and personal politics. The people in the intelligence circles in Washington did not like the people that were running the intelligence station out in Honolulu, and for their own political gain, they wanted to be the voices that were being listened to. They wanted to be the one in the ears of the higher up because it helped their own position. And so this terrible and also stupid thing happened. And people went along with it willingly and happily so that they could prove that they were good citizens.
I don't think there's a whole lot I can add to that without getting us banned again. Because I could parallel that to what's going on, because there are certain organizations that are a pipeline to certain companies that pay a lot of money to executives that they get from these organizations. And there's just too much that goes together. And then lawmakers that make a little bit too much money, back to the screen I shared earlier, supporting those companies. So not like that's insider trading or anything, but
how deep down this rabbit hole do you want to go?
Let me take a bathroom break and we'll decide on a timeline, and then we'll.
All right, good plan. All right, so I want to go back to what got me down the dark rabbit hole of evil that I showed with the history of AIDS research and the very recent and disturbing history of AIDS drug experiments being done on children in foster care who had no say in the matter. This goes back to what I started on of these people can't be trusted, because this is kind of creepy and weird. So this is an emergency appropriations act that was passed in 2005, I believe. 2006. So it was supplemental appropriations to address hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico and pandemic influenza. What? So the overwhelming majority of the act is about emergency appropriations for preemptive action and then relief action.
Which this would have been in
For
the tail
hurricanes.
end. This would have been on the tail end of Hurricane Katrina, because that
Yes.
was 2005. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what spawned this. That's what prompted this. But then they stick in here this stuff about vaccines. And there's a whole bunch of legalese gobbledygook here that basically says that the government will co-own any vaccine that it helps fund. Okay, and I've mentioned, I don't remember if it was in the episode that got taken down or the one before that, there's something called the Bayh-Dole Act. Evan Bayh, B-A-Y-H.
It was the one that got taken down.
Okay, so this was passed in 1980. Evan Bayh, Democrat senator from, I believe, Indiana, and Bob Dole, Republican senator from Kansas. And if you look into it, it's pretty controversial for a number of reasons, depending on if you're on the right or the left. But basically, it allowed for patents from government-funded research, where before that, if you were doing stuff on a government grant, the government would own the patent and then it would license it. So this allowed people who worked on it, including bureaucrats who approved the grants and helped in the grants. So these agencies, as well as these private individuals and nonprofits, universities mainly, would be patent holders or co-patent holders. So they inserted this language into this Hurricane Relief Act, which is weird to begin with. Okay, it gets a little weirder. This is a contract between the NIH and Moderna to jointly own any vaccine that is developed through mRNA research. So this was done back in, where is the date on this? Because this one is weirder. I
think I saw something on this.
Here we go.
2014.
Yeah.
Or is
So,
that 2019?
No. This is why it's so weird, because this contract was drawn up and signed by Moderna in 2014 when they started doing mRNA research. And then, curiously, on January 13th of 2020, the branch chief for the NIAID signed it to put it into effect. Does that raise alarm bells to anybody? Does that seem weird to anybody?
I think I've stuck to this point and I've been consistent on it. Sometimes, you could throw all these conspiracy guesses out there. I'm not going to call them theories because of my science background, but conspiracy guesses out there or hypotheses out there. And usually when you really break it down, just follow that. Just follow where that goes and it'll lead you where you want to go. It doesn't always mean it's malicious, but you can see, if you can see who's getting that, then you know where the roots of something typically is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that. I forgot where I was going with this. Well, I've mentioned before Time Ghost History is a channel on YouTube. And they have some other stuff. World War II. These are the guys that started the World War I in real time channel, and now they're doing a World War II in real time channel, and they have a sub series that's the World War II in real time is weekly episodes, basically reporting the news of what happened that week. But then they do twice monthly, I believe, series called War Against Humanity, and the more recent episodes have been about something that a lot of people don't know, which was the German war economy was run by slave labor. And that is, so there's a pretty good documentary on Netflix called Hitler's Circle of Evil. And it's about how basically the upper circle of the Nazi party was basically a mafia family. And it was all about getting filthy rich. And so a lot of these, a lot of the people in the upper circles were using people from concentration camps and POWs, especially Slavs from the Eastern Front, as slave labor. And they were getting kickbacks and cuts from that. So, well, follow the money.
North Korea still sells their citizens into slave. That's where a big chunk of their GDP comes from.
So you said it may not be malicious, but it damn well can be. And if you start going down that road, it can certainly become that. Especially the more you tell yourself this is for the greater good. I'm sure the evil sons of bitches who are performing those medical experiments on children think they're doing the world a favor. You're not. You're an evil piece of crap. But someone's getting a lot of cash for that. Someone is getting very rich for that. And they're using that wealth and power and connection to keep themselves immune from the consequences they should be suffering.
Well, and you look at some of the things that are passing, like the infrastructure bill and these stimulus packages and stuff. These 3, 4, 5,000 page documents that there's no way the lawmakers read before they signed this thing. Even if they have a crew of 20 people trying to read parts of it, where in that document is the funding for this stuff? It's in there somewhere. The funding's coming from somewhere.
And I think that is part of the intention. It's not just that everyone's trying to get their own, and that's why these bills are multi-thousands of pages. They're trying to hide stuff. Oh my gosh, we need hurricane relief because of the disaster that was caused by Katrina. It wasn't caused by Katrina. It was actually caused by evil politicians who took the money that was supposed to go to upkeep of the levees and stuck it in their pocket. Amazing how this works, and amazing how this is still going on today. I forgot where I was going. I was so angry.
Well, we were going somewhere around here, I think. Yeah. Amazing how this works. So when we use certain terms, and one of them we talk about is insider trading. Martha Stewart, right?
Yep.
Insider trading. When a citizen of the US gets busted for insider trading, it's years in jail and thousands and thousands and thousands, depending on how much they did in fines. If a politician makes laws that benefits their own stocks and bonds, which we would consider that insider trading, and they get caught doing that specifically for that reason, it's a $200 fine paid for by the ethics committee, not even themselves.
Yeah.
It's don't do it again. If people are paying attention, they'll know you did it. Other than that, that's the only repercussion you have. So,
Well,
what the solution to that problem is, I don't know, because I mean, people invest in companies all the time, and you see a trend and you're going to try to make the best investments. But if you are caught making policy that benefits your investments specifically for that reason, that's a really fuzzy line that's got to be figured out, because I'm making this policy because I think it's best for the country. I might invest in the company that benefits from it because, well, shoot, that's a good investment. That's a really hard thing to discriminate or to discern from.
yeah.
I'm making a policy that's best for my investment.
So which is coming first? Is we enact this law and, oh, hey, that's going to mean this, so I should invest in that, versus if I do this, then these stocks will go through the roof. So
But then you take even politicians out of it. You look at your news organizations. You know, they have investments. Their particular editorial personalities have investments. And someone's got floating around there somewhere all the CNN shows sponsored by Pfizer. There's no vested interest there, right? Do we say something negative about our sponsor? No.
You say that, and that brings me to something I was about to bring up here in one of the last articles I wanted to share. I'm old enough to remember when people complained about pharmacy reps and about drug commercials and about the intermingling of the people who make the drugs with the people who prescribe the drugs, and the problematic conflict of interest that creates. Have we completely forgotten that? That wasn't that long ago that people were making noise about that.
Well, I remember one side of the aisle used to use a term called big pharma. And all of a sudden that's just kind of melted away because it aligns with my tribe.
Consider that when you consider this. Judge holds hospital in contempt of court for refusing that which shall not be named to COVID patient on ventilator, ignoring court order. So there have been a number of cases of this. And this, again, we have right to try laws on the books. And you have patients who have developed severe symptoms and are now in a hospital, and the hospital's not doing anything except putting them on a ventilator. So what the hell vested interest do they have in blocking this? Hospitals are going to court to prevent family doctors from giving treatments to these patients who the hospital is doing nothing but putting them on a ventilator. And if you look into this, the hospital starts throwing up all these roadblocks and saying, well, you know, none of our doctors believe in it. Do they? Or is it the administration doesn't believe in it and the doctors don't want to lose their paycheck? And you guys get tons of money from pharmaceutical companies. Again, I'm old enough to remember when people complained about this intermingling of the two. Well, what the heck do you care if another doctor does it? Well, they don't have privileges here. what the heck does this bureaucracy matter when somebody's going to die and all you're doing is keeping them on a ventilator and you're not going to treat them? We have right to try laws. This person has a human and a legally protected right to try. And if they have a doctor, a licensed doctor, prescribing an approved medication, why are you throwing up such roadblocks? And the headline and the thing people keep focusing on with these orders is the drug which shall not be named. It's irrelevant. And the judge here made a point of, I'm not ruling on the effectiveness of this because I'm a judge. I'm not a doctor. I'm ruling on the fact that you can't prohibit this kind of stuff on a moral level, on an ethical level, and on a legal level. You cannot prohibit this stuff. So finally, after ignoring the initial order, Fisher held the hospital in contempt of court, ordered the administration. Again, he's ordering the administration of this drug because this is the drug that the family doctor had prescribed, and they were blocking the administering of that. Fisher held the hospital in contempt for, quote, needlessly interposing requirements that stand in the way of the patient's desired physician administering investigational drugs as part of the Healthcare Decisions Act and the federal and state Right to Try Acts. No good reason or good cause was given other than convenience for the need of a formal attending physician when there are at least 3 physicians involved in the patient's care. The relief herein can be accomplished without requiring anyone serving in the role of attending physician. Fisher gave the hospital until 9 p.m. on Monday to administer the drug which shall not be named, or he would level additional fines. The patient was given the drug which shall not be named at 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the order was going to expire. Again, as we've been saying ad nauseum, is this really about what you say it's about? If these are your actions, how am I not going to interpret nefarious, malicious action on your part? How am I not going to infer that you have some sort of vested interest other than what you say, which is public health? When you put up this much of a fight to do something where you're not involved, you don't have to do anything. You just can stand back and say, hey, we're not involved with this. This is what we recommend. This is what the science says. These are what our doctors recommend and will prescribe. You're not involved here. So why are you fighting so hard against it?
I would be beating a dead horse to just talk about the lack of conversation, the lack of availability in we had our talk with Stephen on the drug not to be named, and one of the counters now is the talking point you're hearing now is the only successful studies are in places that have high parasitic rates. So the reason it's successful is because it's killing the parasites, which become a comorbidity in their way. So that's the new talking point. But the problem is we don't have good comparisons because there is no good US or Western led studies of that certain drug. There's a bunch of crappy, dozen participant trials out there that don't show anything. But the big giant studies are done in these areas because they had it available and they thought to use it. And we don't know if it's because it kills the parasites. We don't know if it's because it's actually effective. We know the mechanisms are plausible, but we don't know what their actual effect size is. One of the mechanisms is similar. And again, don't use the right-wing talking point of saying it's the same drug, but it has a similar mechanism to the Pfizer drug that they're touting now for treatment. So Does it work that way? We don't know because no one's done it. We've got models that show it works, and that's all the drug companies have for theirs. They have models that shows theirs is going to work better. So because of things like that you just showed, we don't have good US data. And again, the correlation with these parasitic areas is they were already using that drug there for so long that it was right on hand, and the doctors that said, hey, this might help, that's kind of a selection bias in where you're going to get the studies, because it was already there being used and it was plausible to help. So it was one of the first things on their mind. I don't know. Until we have good Western-led controlled trials, it's always going to be a speculation. So therefore, the doctor should be able to use his best informed consent with the patient to treat it. If you want to try it, go for it. It's safe and effective. It's safe. We don't know about effective. It's safe. Yeah. So, yeah, that's sickening. I was looking up something. I didn't get it before you were done talking, but I think it's the state of Washington that barred certain treatments, or you'll lose your medical license. So that doctor wouldn't exist in the state of Washington that prescribed this thing for his patient that the hospital wouldn't administer. Why is it barred? Because politics.
I'm looking for something here because you reminded me of something, because
we
you
got
said
about 5 minutes.
so. If you want to go down another interesting rabbit hole, look at remdesivir, because you said we don't have treatments. That was the one before the monoclonal antibodies. That was the one approved treatment that was being pushed. Okay, so remdesivir is no longer used, or well, actually, I think it is still being used, despite the fact there have been a number of studies that show either it does nothing or it causes renal failure. Okay, remdesivir is AZT 2.0. Go look into remdesivir and Ebola. Remdesivir was tried as an Ebola drug. Remdesivir's human trial for Ebola was stopped because it had a higher death rate than Ebola. History repeats itself because no one gives a damn. This is AZT 2.0.
Well, I think we didn't do anything to get us banned this time. I will try to keep the headline mild. And I don't know. What should we do for the thumbnail?
I mean, we have so many good memes. They're all probably going to get us banned.
Yeah, I was thinking, come on, bring it up. See,
it takes a while at your age.
Yeah, well, it happens. Let me see. Where are we at? No, don't zoom. Share. I was thinking this one.
Oh. It's not funny because it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, I think your Fauci meme got us banned. I'm gonna blame you. I mean, we could go very neutral on this and use this one you sent me.
It's the science, bro.
The science. I'm going to use this one. That'll keep us from being flagged, and it's relevant. So,
and it's Brian May is an astrophysicist, which is why it's hilarious.
All right, dude. I will see you next time. We'll probably do a Wheel of Time episode after this Friday's episode.
Mother. Yeah. All right, fine. I'll watch it, but Witcher season 2 comes out tomorrow, so
yes,
at least
and
I'll have a palate cleanser.
We need to get the affable gentleman to
yeah.
to
I'll send him a message.
Has he watched Wheel of Time? Because I would like to hear his comments on that too.
It's a good question.
All right, we'll get on that.
All right,
All
later,
right, till
y'all.
next time, guys.